Thank you, Ken, and thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to be here, to be amongst all my fellow farmers. Lyndon Lucas and I, in all fairness, farm in rural western Oklahoma. She refers to herself as a rancher. I refer to myself as a farmer, a cow-calf operation and hard red winter wheat. I do not have enough soil, nor do I have enough rain to raise anything else. So I'm a little envious of you who have the capacity and the ability to engage in what is very intense production agriculture. And peanuts, a classic example of that. My tenure on the Ag Committee goes back to basically the first day I walked in May of 1994. I crossed the 30-year mark as a result of a special election back in May. So not only, as Ken alluded to, am I the most senior member of the Ag Committee, I'm also the most senior member of the Science Committee, and with the exception of a Democrat lady who's ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, I'm the senior member of Financial Services on both sides of the aisle. So that makes me, I won't say one of the old guys, but that makes me the member who has responsibilities within the Republican conference and on the floor to occasionally stop and remind my friends about where we came from in agriculture and in many other subject matters, how we got to this point, and where we need to go forth to. Again, by way of background, I represent the northwest half of the great state of Oklahoma. If you read Mr. Steinbeck's book, which my father did not allow in the house, about the Dust Bowl and the Great Economic Depression, those were my neighbors. Those were my predecessors in rural western Oklahoma. My home county had 14,000 people in it, according to the 1930 census. And contrary to my children, Ken, I wasn't there, their opinion of that. We just made it back up to 3,500 in the last census. 14,000 in 1930, dropped to barely 3,000 people over the course of 2 decades because of the Depression and the drought, and we've worked our way back up to 3,500. So you see, I'm very sensitive about these issues because only the Lord controls the weather, no matter what the United States Senate says. Only the Lord controls the weather, but the economic policies that we follow in this country, most specifically the farm bills we write, determine what happens in this nation. And if we get the policies wrong, we can create misery beyond belief, as my home community is an example of. Now that said, I come to Congress in 1994. We are towards the end of what I refer to as the first generation of Farm Bill policy. Remember, starting with the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. My grandfather, till the day he died, called it the AAA Act, supply management. But by 1994, that was not politically sustainable anymore. And my neighbor in Kansas, Mr. Roberts, started us down the trail in something called freedom to farm. You remember how stressful that experience was. You remember the gyrations we went through in all commodity groups, not just peanuts, all commodity groups. And by the time I became chairman in 2012 and started the Farm Bill process, we needed the third generation Farm Bill. And that's what we're working under now. Going from supply management to direct payments, which might have been good economics but was not politically sustainable, to the third generation, using the concepts of price protection, weather protection. Think of it as insurance to provide that safety net. And it took 2.5 years to pass that Farm Bill. I didn't have gray hair when I started the 14 Farm Bill. I didn't take high blood pressure medicine when I started the 14 Farm Bill. I might have been a half-inch taller when I started the 14 Farm Bill. But the 14 Farm Bill was a major struggle. And the leadership of your organization and the folks like Bob who represent you so ably in D.C. know that starting from scratch, reinventing the wheel, can be a real challenge. And we spent 2.5 years to get there. And I would tell you, as you heard me say at the time, and many of you I've worked with for my entire 30 years, the principle of the 14 Farm Bill was all commodity groups, all regions, everybody has to have access to the safety net. We weren't picking winners and losers. We weren't picking things based on who had the most tonnage or the most dollars of a commodity in this country. Safety net, all regions, and all commodities, and we worked our way through that. I think surprisingly successful, considering my successor in 2018 essentially took the 14 bill and did a little tweaking around the edges, and we had some battles over the food stamp programs and social nutrition, SNAP, and we moved forward. Now it's time to address that issue again. And what's the biggest struggle? And I want to mention a point or two, and then let's talk about the political lay of the land. And a little time at the end, Ken, for some give and take. I've never known peanut people to be timid, so a little give and take. What's the biggest challenge we face this time? Well, it's the fact that we've come through a decade where we had inflation, COVID, trade wars, military wars around the world, every kind of gyration economically you can imagine. And because in 18, the leadership of the committee didn't have enough money, the reference prices were basically left untouched. I and my colleagues on the Ag Committee know that what you sell compared to the inputs you pay for, all the costs, machinery, equipment, seed, fertilizer, fuel, every transportation, we know those costs are dramatically higher. And that's been part of the effort in this Farm Bill, is to address the reference price. Now, the draft that left the Ag Committee would raise the reference price on peanuts by 17.5%. Now, can we argue that that's not enough? Well, probably so. But it is a commitment from Mr. Thompson and the Ag Committee that I'm a part of as a whole that we have to address the economic conditions as they've changed. Now, seems logical, seems straightforward. Think about the environment that I work in. By the way, how many of you stayed up and watched for an hour and a half the President's acceptance speech last night at the convention? You are good people. I did too. Oh my goodness. But it is presidential campaign season. And that is an extra challenge for the Farm Bill process, that every 4 years process of picking a new president. And it's not just the rematch between the two. It's not just the challenges, both physical and otherwise, that both candidates face. It's also the legislative body. When we organized, I became chairman of the Science Committee in this session of Congress because on Organization Day, there was, I think, 5 more Republicans than there were Democrats out of 435. Retirements, position changes, purgings of leadership. At one point, we were down to a 1-seat majority out of 435. Nobody has a commanding legislative authority when you have a 1-seat majority out of 435 people. On the Senate side, 1 or 2 seat difference. But the Senate is a different body, and understand, I'm a House member. Always have been, as long as Linda Lucas and the voters will let me be, always will be. But the Senate's a different body. In the House, if you have a majority, you win. In the Senate, you have to have 60 of the 100 senators to vote cloture to move legislation forward. That's a supermajority. So those issues, a presidential campaign, the narrowness of the margins on each side have made it more difficult. So where are we at? We passed our House version out of committee, waiting for floor time. The Senate majority has provided an outline, but no legislative text, no markups, no discussion of going to the floor. If we can finish our appropriation bills in the next 2 weeks, I hope there's a window of opportunity. But this is going to be a challenging bill because the Democrats on the Ag Committee I don't think they're particularly opposed to making the safety net more viable for producers, but they want a rather dramatic increase in the feeding programs in SNAP. And the bill that came out of committee guarantees that the money available for SNAP, food stamps in the old days we would call it, will increase at the rate of inflation. So buying power will be preserved. They want a 20 or 30% increase on top of that. And there's just not enough money to make all that happen. So we're struggling with those issues. Can we get a farm bill done? Absolutely. Absolutely. Is it going to be easy? No, never is, never will be. But I need your assistance before we throw the floor open for questions. Groups like yourself engaging within your home states and engaging across the country to build support for the Farm Bill process. The turnover has been incredible. And when you talk to a member of Congress, Republican or Democrat, you've got to assume that he or she will have been there less than 6 years. They weren't around for the last Farm Bill. A whole bunch of them weren't around when Donald Trump was president the last time. This education process is critically important because members of Congress, I sincerely believe, overwhelmingly want to do the right thing. The problem is, most of them, God bless their souls, as my late grandmother would have said, don't have a clue what the right thing is. And that's why we have to work together to drive that educational process.